Hello again. As many of you know, very recently Square Enix invited a bunch of content creators to various locations to play test Final Fantasy XVI, and the reviews are out and they're overall pretty positive. With that said, most of the reviews seem to focus mainly on gameplay, because really that's what the demo was made for. In fact, Square Enix very specifically told them not to disclose some certain story elements that they were shown at this event. So I've noticed a lot of the discussion around this most recent news drop revolves around gameplay, and as many of you may know, my previous few videos focus mostly on story. And so I wanted to make this video to try to extract what story we can from the B-roll that Square Enix provided and maybe some of the interviews. So getting into it, let's start with the castle scene. Cid and Clive are making their way through this Imperial castle that is infested with wallowed soldiers, going to the dungeon first to try to find the Dominant of Fire. Now, I've seen people make some mistakes when thinking about this. The Dominant of Fire in this case is not Clive's brother Joshua. Instead, it is the hooded man who turns into Ifrit and ultimately kills his brother. You see, at this point in the game, Clive's goal is revenge. We've known for a while that it's a revenge story, and he's seeking revenge on that hooded man who he believes killed his brother. So Cid and Clive are going to this dungeon seeking Clive's revenge, and like I said, we're in an Imperial castle, that being the Empire of Sanbreque, but there's Kingdom of Waloed soldiers here. And these soldiers are actually basically Waloed special forces led by Benedicta. So Benedicta came here also searching for this Dominant of Fire, and she got here first and is kind of hiding him from us. So we make our way through the castle, fighting people as we go, and ultimately we end up meeting Benedicta in a chapel in the castle. We've also known for a while that Cid and Benedicta have a history together, and that's shown on full display here. Benedicta makes a comment about not groveling at the feet of false gods, which gives us some idea of how the rest of the world sees the Empire's religion, and also I think gives us a little more confidence in saying that the person sitting on the throne in the Empire scene that we've seen a couple times is probably a girl who's seen as a reincarnation of this goddess, which is also why maybe people outside see her as a false goddess who's really just a puppet or a theocratic leader who tells their kingdom what to do rather than an actual goddess. Cid and Benedicta talk. It becomes abundantly clear that Cid has a history with both Benedicta and Barnabas. In fact, we've known that Cid used to be the captain of the guard in Waloed, that is until Barnabas came. And we don't know exactly what happened, but it's safe to say that Barnabas probably did something to betray Cid's trust since he calls him a liar, and Cid left and started his own thing where he searches for bearers and branded to try to rescue them and give them normal lives. So this is probably the first time they've seen each other in quite some time, and Benedicta tries to recruit Cid because Benedicta is basically an agent of Barnabas, and Barnabas's ultimate goal, as stated in one of the trailers, is to unite the Dominants. So she's there to collect the Icon of Fire, and she just happens to run into Cid, and Cid is the Dominant of Vermouth. She tries to recruit Cid. Cid basically has none of it. Cid tells Clive to step back. Benedicta and Cid fight, and ultimately Cid loses. There's then not a whole lot of story because they show the boss fight between Benedicta's quote-unquote sisters and Clive, where Clive ultimately wins, and then Clive checks up on Cid, who got thrown into the statue. He's okay, he's alive, but he's not doing too well, and he tells us to go chase after Benedicta so that she doesn't get away with the Icon of Fire. We confront Benedicta, and Benedicta is really kind of speaking down to us at this point, calling us a lost lamb, basically saying that she's the shepherd, we're the lamb, and we should shut up and let her do what she wants, because ultimately she's a dominant and we're just some branded. And just so you know, branded in this world is that tattoo that's on Clive's face, and it basically means that he's a bearer, which also means that he can use magic. And in this world, they're seen as second-class citizens and often enslaved. In fact, that's probably what Clive was doing before he met Cid. So Clive doesn't back down this time, and so we fight Benedicta, but this time we win. And Benedicta's all pissed because she's like, how could I have lost to a branded? How could I have lost to a slave? You know, she's basically a walking nuclear weapon, and somehow she lost to us. And so that enrages her, and Clive, who doesn't really care, walks up to probably grab Benedicta's coat collar and try to get the information out of her that he wants, which is, where is the Dominant of Fire? But when he goes to reach, this green light comes out from Benedicta's chest and into Clive, and it's almost like we're absorbing some power from Benedicta. And so this gives an answer to a question that we've had for a long time, which is how Clive gets the power of the Dominants. We've known that Clive was basically granted the blessing of the Phoenix by Joshua after he won a tournament when he was a kid, but we weren't sure if all of the other dominants would bless Clive, or would he absorb them, or what. And it turns out that at the very least he absorbs some of them, and maybe people like Jill and Sid give him their blessing. Who knows? Or maybe he has to suck their power from them too. And the other interesting thing that pops up here is that a voice starts playing in Clive's head, except the voice isn't speaking any language that we know of. But there's subtitles that read in English, as if we can't understand the sound waves, like it doesn't process in our ears as language, but somehow subconsciously we know what they're saying. We know their intention. And this is something entirely new with this gameplay footage. We don't really know what this is. I have guesses, and I'll get to that a little later, but it's a mystery right now. So let's get to that later. Jump ahead, and by the way, I'm almost positive that this big Garuda fight scene takes place after this Benedictus fight scene, for two main reasons. One, Sid very clearly does not think that Clive is a dominant when he fights Benedicta the first time, right? He tells Clive to step back to protect him, basically. And later on, when we get to there, when Clive fights Benedicta and turns into Ifrit, Sid is actually surprised. He didn't know that we could turn into Ifrit. So this likely takes place after the Benedicta fight for that reason. Plus, in terms of creating a game, it would make sense to fight Benedicta, the half icon, first, and then fight the big icon. It wouldn't make sense to fight the big icon first and then come back to the small half transformed Benedicta fight. You tend to build up to your fights, not vice versa. Oh, and on top of that, the level is one level higher, so there's that too. We cut ahead to this scene where Sid and Clive are walking together on this path in this windstorm, chasing after what we can presume to be the hooded figure. Because, yeah, Clive sees him in the distance and says, hey, that's the guy that killed my brother. I know it's him. I've seen his face for the past 13 years. Clive runs ahead in front of Sid, and this rock comes down and blocks Torgal and Sid off from Clive. And there's this whole cinematic sequence where we walk through this crumbling valley as the wind's blowing and Garuda's swooping down, and it's this whole cinematic feel. And that culminates in us coming face to face with the dominant of fire on the cliff, or at least the hooded man. And right before Clive can talk to them, Garuda swoops in. And now this is interesting, right? Because you would assume if this wasn't like some figment of Clive's imagination or something, like where did the guy go? Like he just disappears after we start fighting Garuda. So there's definitely some mystery there. But we fight Garuda in our human form. We kind of beat her, and then she comes back, and at this point Clive has to transform or else he's gonna die. So with the rage inside of him, he transforms into Ifrit. There's the whole icon battle. But right before he transformed, there's a voice playing in Clive's head, and this voice is saying, awaken, child of fate. Again, in a language that we can't comprehend, but that has subtitles that we can read. So again, this is very much like, if you've ever played Final Fantasy XIV, the dragons have like this weird way of talking, but it goes to text bubbles that we can understand, and canonically it's basically all the characters just innately understand it. Then this also reminds me of the Emeratines of Shadowbringers, who spoke in this melodic way, but we could still understand them. So there is some precedent in 14 with something like this going on. Here's my personal theory. I think the most likely scenario is that the thing that is talking is Ifrit. And the main reason I think that is because at this point in time, as you may have noticed, because I didn't call the hooded man Ifrit's dominant, I called him the dominant of fire, as the characters did. The characters at this point in time have no clue who Ifrit is. Ifrit is not a concept that exists in this world yet. He is a kind of a hidden second icon that shouldn't exist. However, in the Revenge trailer, Clive blurts out this line saying, "Come to me, Ifrit!" So at some point in time, he learns Ifrit's true nature and true name, right? So I think it's most likely that, similar to Naruto with like the nine-tailed fox and the Jinchurikis, Clive can talk to Ifrit within his mind. And Ifrit at these points, when he's absorbing Garuda's power and when he's transforming, is talking to him. So I think that's the most likely scenario. The other scenario is that it's related to the fallen ancients that have been discussed before, where basically there's an ancient civilization that fell from the sky. That's where the fallen come from. And it's definitely going to be something that comes in the late game. And it's possible that this hooded figure comes from these fallen, and maybe they have some way of communicating with Clive. But like I said, a little less confident in that, more confident in it being Ifrit. So anyway, getting back to it, we fight Garuda as Ifrit, we end up winning, but we lose control of ourselves, which is something else that has been theorized with the blue and orange eyes, which holds up here. And Sid has to transform into Rumu to basically put us back in our place and get us to come back to our senses or lose enough energy to maintain our transformation. And that's basically in terms of story that was shown. A lot of this was probably self-explanatory, but like I said, I hadn't seen any resources that really talked about it, so if you're confused, hopefully this helped. And now, if you will, I released my last video right before all this information came out. I had been working on it for a long time, and I wanted to get it out because I had heard the rumors that some gameplay was going to be shown. And so with this release of gameplay, I kind of want to give a bit of an update on my last video, especially because it was so popular relative to my other ones. And so, the foundation of my last video, which my last video explained the order of events as I believe they will happen, is extremely solid now. Basically, the foundation of that video, I used Clive's outfit and brand to try to place where in the story events were taking place. And in this part of the story, for instance, when we're fighting Benedicta, we still have that Imperial armor on from when we were a slave. And in a couple of levels, we'll lose that armor, but we'll still have the brand. And as shown in some of the screenshots from this info dump, there are no armor pieces, at least no real ones. There's like a belt, some bracers, and accessories. And so nothing really changes the look of Clive other than his sword. So that armor foundation is extremely solid. So in that respect, my last video is very true. Also, I had hypothesized that this was actually a brand on Clive's face because he was probably enslaved by the Imperial Kingdom, and that also seems to be holding true. Another thing I had mentioned that came out in interviews is that Cid has a central hideout called, I think, the Hideaway, where basically we'll go back to in between missions to get hunt requests or, you know, do some story exposition and rest up before our next mission type deal. And so I believe that where I placed that in that central mountain range that is blighted, I think that's extremely likely to be the location. However, even though I was right about there being a central hideout and it probably being in that location, I was wrong about a couple things as well. The first thing I was wrong about is again related to the map. So I was right that there's a central hideout. However, I was wrong in that I had assumed that the plot would follow kind of a linear progression where we would go from place to place to place in a certain order following, you know, the order of events basically. However, it appears much more likely that we kind of go and do a mission. So we go out to this castle and try to find the dominant of fire, and then we go back to the hideout, and then we go out and do another mission, and then we come back to the hideout, and then we so on and so forth. It's a hub and spoke model rather than a linear model, similar to Dragon Age Inquisition. So that is something that I personally got wrong. And there's one other thing that I know of, and I'm sure there's other things that will be wrong, but there's one other thing that I know of that I got wrong, and that is I'd made the assumption that since Clive and Barnabas have similar goals, that is the destruction of the Mother Crystals, that somehow, some way after fighting Benedicta, we were kind of brought into the fold with Barnabas, and we were going to kind of fight as a common ally against the world, destroying the Mother Crystals. After Cid's talk with Benedicta, I find that extremely unlikely. It's maybe still possible, but it's a bit of a pipe dream. Instead, it seems more like we each have our own reasons for destroying the Mother Crystals, and so it's more like we're allies by chance rather than by choice. One more thing. And this kind of ties into gameplay. One of the things that people had noted a lot was that the developers had stated that this was a demo build of the game. Things were going to be different in the story when we actually get our hands on the game. And to me, that was kind of obvious. And here's the reason why. In this demo build, all of the people playing the game had 3 icons. They had Titan, they had Phoenix, and they had Garuda. Now, obviously, with Clive stealing Garuda's power at the end of the first sequence, having Garuda doesn't make any sense. Also, having Titan doesn't make any sense, because at this point, I don't even think we've met Hugo. And so, something I want people to take a mental note of is that in the physical game, when we do this section, we will only have Phoenix. I'm like 99% sure that we will only have Phoenix. And so, some people have been making comments about how the game felt a little easy. And my response to that is, yeah, of course it did. You had a block function that will not exist when you play the actual game, that being Titan's special ability. But you also can do way more damage because you can cooldown dump. You won't be able to cooldown dump when you just have Phoenix. So that's something to keep in mind, and hopefully maybe something to give you a little more hope about the game being maybe a little more difficult come release, at least in normal mode. We know about the Final Fantasy mode and all of that as well. But I mean, that's basically it. Ultimately, this press event really was centered around gameplay, and there's a ton of stuff out there regarding gameplay that you've probably already watched, or I would encourage you to watch. But given that I haven't played the game yet, I didn't feel like I was at liberty to discuss it. So hopefully this video helped explain the story as it was presented in this gameplay demo that the press had played. If you liked it, leave a like. If you think I missed something, leave a comment. There was a lot of footage to come through and a lot of interviews on this one, so it's entirely possible that I did miss something. If you like this video, I put a lot of work into my previous video, which you may not have seen. I'll leave a link to it, but it basically provides a theory and thesis as to how the game of Final Fantasy 16 will play out story-wise. And as I said earlier in this video, I think it's really solid, and overall, I think it's a decent video. And that's it. So thanks for watching, and goodbye.